Hey everybody, Steve here. I have a lesson prepared for us about COVID-19 vocabulary that will help you to understand the dialogue about COVID-19 today and pandemics in general. You probably hear people talking about this all the time, and I want to give you the words to enable you to understand what's going on, what's being said, and improve your English speaking skills overall. Watch this video with me.
You've heard that old saying, there's strength in numbers. Well, it turns out numbers may be our greatest defense against the spread of COVID. It's called herd immunity. And the way it works is that once enough of us become immune to the virus, spread of the virus slows, and eventually the pandemic could die. Thanks to vaccinations, herd immunity has been effective at eliminating polio, smallpox, and until recently, measles. Unfortunately, we don't see lasting herd immunity against viruses that mutate quickly, like the flu or the common cold. Herd immunity is a place we'd like to be with COVID, and sooner rather than later. But how do we get there? It could happen naturally as the virus makes its way through our communities, but that could be dangerous because, as we've seen, many people with COVID become severely ill, and for some, it can actually be deadly. Many have been wondering, do people have some immune protection after they recover? Experts tell us they think that's true, but it's not proven, and if it's true, we're not sure just how long that immunity may last. But since herd immunity is our goal, to know if we're there, we first need to understand how fast the virus infects other people. That reproduction rate is what scientists call the R Nought of the virus. And for COVID, that number is somewhere between 2 and 3. So that means each person with coronavirus can infect, on average, between 2 and 3 others. The second part of the herd immunity equation depends on us, specifically how many of us are already immune. In a world where no one is immune to COVID and each of us is at risk, the virus can spread like wildfire. But imagine a world where there is herd immunity. Say 75% of us are already immune. That means 3/4 of the people exposed to anyone with the virus just won't get sick. So even if a few of us have the virus, the rest of us who are immune stop it from spreading. That's the kind of numbers game we're talking about. But it's not a game. It's actually a formula based on that reproductive rate of the virus. Knowing that, we can figure out how many of us need to be immune for us to reach that sweet spot of herd immunity. And that critical threshold for COVID is when 1/2 to 2/3 of the US population is immune. That means somewhere between 150 and 216 million Americans need to be immune to meaningfully stop the virus from spreading throughout the country. But right now, most experts say we're probably a long way away from these kinds of numbers. So just like with many other infectious diseases, the showstopper will be when most people can get a vaccine, once we have one that's proven to work. And the great thing about a vaccine is that it can help build a person's immunity, but without making them sick. Until then, we can all do our part to stop the spread of COVID through physical and social distancing, washing our hands, and staying home when sick.
All right, let's start that again and take it sentence by sentence and see if we can take some of the most important words, phrases, and terms that he uses.
You've heard that old saying, there's strength in numbers. Well, it turns out numbers may be our greatest defense against the spread of COVID.
You've heard that old saying, there's strength in numbers. All right, basically, another word to say that would be proverb. Basically, an old saying. Saying obviously comes from the word say, the verb. Saying is the action. But it's a noun. It means basically a phrase that is supposed to be a moral lesson. But okay, so this lesson. There's strength in numbers. Basically saying that our numbers are our strength. The more numbers you have, the more strength you have. You could say this. Suppose if you went on a camping trip in the woods. You have 5 people with you. All of a sudden, you hear a bear in the woods. Maybe since you have 5 or 6 people, the bear does not attack you. That's because you have high numbers. You have high strength, and the bear gets scared of you and runs away off into the woods. Basically, your strength is your numbers, and if you were alone, for instance, maybe the bear would have attacked you and eaten you. So, that's an example of that saying. All right. Well, turns out. It turns out. When you're speaking, normally you say, well, turns out. numbers might be our greatest defense against the spread of COVID. Well, it turns out, in the end, you could also say, in the end, numbers may be our greatest defense. This is a good phrase to use in writing, but it's also good when you're speaking to give a summary of what happened. Well, turns out the bear ate us. We went on a camping trip. Turns out there was a bear. Well, it turns out there was a bear. So, numbers may be our greatest defense against the spread of COVID. Numbers in this context. Not sure how he's going to be using this. Just keep an eye on this one and see how he brings up numbers in the next part of the video. Greatest defense. All right, this word. It's a common word that's used in sports. You might hear defense and offense. It's also used in the military. You have your attacking side and you have your defending side. So, the defenders are on defense. The greatest defense against the spread of COVID, in this case, is numbers. So, our greatest defense, this is a good phrase, greatest defense against, defending, you are always defending against something. These two words are linked, defending against, or fighting, you could also say fighting off. We fought off the bear, or we defended against the bear from giving us COVID. Maybe the bear had COVID. Maybe you're defending yourself against it. Social distance yourself from the bear.
It's called herd immunity. And the way it works is that once enough of us become immune to the virus, spread of the virus slows, and eventually the pandemic could die.
So we have herd immunity. What does this mean? So, herd. You may have heard herd used in reference to cows. Herd of cows, or maybe sheep. It's always used in livestock, which are basically farm animals that are kept domestically for whatever they provide, whether it's milk or their skin or meat. But herd is basically a group of something. You could say a herd of people, but it doesn't really work like that. You would say a crowd of people. And for sheep specifically, you would say a flock of sheep. But you could say a herd of cattle or a herd of cows. Herd you can also use as a verb. You have your herding dogs, like a sheepdog. A sheepdog will run around the flock of sheep and herd them into a certain direction. You can say herd as the verb, the dog is herding them. Not hurting the sheep, not causing them pain or distress or damage, but he is organizing them by running around them and pushing them into a certain direction. So herd immunity. Immunity is a concept in law. You can be immune from prosecution. Maybe you committed a crime, but you ratted out and you are witnessing against your co-conspirators, and you have immunity from the prosecution. They cannot prosecute you because you are immune for your crimes because of something that you have given to the prosecution. You might hear that on crime shows a lot. He has immunity. This guy has immunity. So herd immunity. Also immunity is a concept, in this case, in science and in health. Your body has an immune response where it becomes resistant to the virus. You might have had the chicken pox as a kid. The chicken pox is a contagious disease that causes a red rash and is very itchy on your skin. After you have it and you are healed and fully recovered from it, your body has developed an immunity against chicken pox. So, herd immunity is the immunity of the entire herd against this virus. The way it works is that, the spread of the virus slows and eventually the pandemic could die. Eventually is little by little. Eventually implies a lengthy amount of time. Maybe slowly, very slowly. Eventually something will happen. You can say, I'm young now, but eventually I will die when I'm older. We all die. So that's a little bit dark, but that's just to prove the concept. Eventually, the pandemic could die in this case.
Thanks to vaccinations, herd immunity has been effective at eliminating polio, smallpox, and until recently, measles. Unfortunately, we don't see lasting herd immunity against viruses that mutate quickly, like the flu or the common cold.
So, we have right here, thanks to is linked to vaccinations. This is the cause. Thanks to vaccinations, herd immunity has been effective at eliminating polio, smallpox, and until recently measles. So you say vaccinations have been the cause of eliminating polio, smallpox, and measles. You say thanks to, you could also say due to. You're indicating that there is a cause. You can also say because of. Due to vaccinations or because of vaccinations, herd immunity has been effective. Vaccinations, this word right here, this is a good word related to vaccines. You probably already know this from earlier in the video. And vaccination is kind of the action noun. Vaccination. The difference is that the vaccine is the cure, and the vaccination is the actual injection that you get. So when you get a vaccination, then you are injected with the vaccine. So it's kind of a small difference. Vaccination can also refer to the number of people that have received the vaccine in a country or in an area. Let's see. Herd immunity has been effective at. So, has been effective at. This phrase, it indicates that something is very good at doing something else. In this case, herd immunity is very good at eliminating polio, smallpox, and measles. Is very good at is a synonym that you can also say has been effective at. It has done a great job at eliminating polio, smallpox, and measles, being effective and effectiveness. So basically, you'd let's see, a way to say that there are two salesmen. One salesman talks to 10 clients per day. The other salesman talks to 20 clients per day. That salesman is more effective at talking to clients. He can talk to a higher number of clients. Maybe the first salesman sells more. He closes more sales with clients than the second salesman. That salesman, the first one, is more effective at closing sales. Maybe he sells 8 out of 10 clients, and the second one sells to 6 out of 20 clients. It's because he makes more sales than the second salesman, he is more effective. He is more effective at being a salesman, or he is more effective at closing sales. In this case, effective at eliminating polio, smallpox, and until recently measles. Okay, so eliminating is totally getting rid of something, or very nearly getting rid of something entirely. So polio used to be a huge epidemic, pandemic really, worldwide, until the polio vaccine came out, and the polio was very nearly eliminated from the world. And the same is the case for smallpox, which used to kill countless numbers of the world's population, as well as measles. And until recently, you have polio, smallpox, measles. You have a list here. Generally, in other cases, you might say polio, smallpox, and measles. Until recently is kind of a little extra. It's good for writing. You can use this in your writing when you're making a list that is separated by time distinctions. So maybe first comes polio, second is smallpox, and thirdly, most recently, measles. Recently is the time distinction, and until recently, measles. Maybe polio and smallpox were eliminated in 50 years ago, and maybe measles was 15 or 10 years ago. It is more recent. It is closer to the present time. Okay, unfortunately. This word unfortunately. This means means you have some bad luck. Something bad happened for one reason or another, and you're expressing some kind of sorrow or regret. So, unfortunately, we regret that we don't see lasting herd immunity. Lasting, this word, lasting. It means it's closer to permanent, you could say. And it is the opposite of temporary. This word mutate. You might have heard mutants, like X-Men. It refers to their cells that have changed and become different from other cells, and it has turned them into people that are different from other people with superpowers. That's what I think of anyway. Mutate means You have one cell, and it's doing good. And let's just draw this like this. You have a cell that looks like this. Over time, it reproduces and reproduces. Sometimes a cell will make maybe a cell that is shaped like this. It's different from the original. It is a mutation. Usually it's by random chance, but for some reason or another, viruses can mutate as they reproduce. They reproduce and reproduce and reproduce themselves inside your body, and maybe one of those, maybe there's a small chance of a mutation, which could cause a vaccine to be less effective. It has mutated into a new type of virus that the vaccine can't treat. So this happens with the flu. The flu and the common cold are very quickly mutating viruses. They mutate almost as fast as we can come up with vaccines for. You might hear of the flu shot, and it's different about every year because they're constantly coming out with new vaccines because it's a virus that mutates quickly. In addition to the common cold, which is similar. I'm not a medical expert, so can't really speak to that, but anyway.
Herd immunity is a place we'd like to be with COVID, and sooner rather than later. But how do we get there? It could happen naturally as the virus makes its way through our communities, but that could be dangerous because, as we've seen, many people with COVID become severely ill, and for some, it can actually be deadly.
Herd immunity is a place we would like to be with COVID, and sooner rather than later. So this phrase is a place we would like to be. This actually kind of more refers to a state of being rather than an actual place. We would like to be COVID-free, but when he says place, he doesn't mean an actual place. He means kind of the condition overall of our country regarding or related to COVID. And sooner rather than later. So, sooner rather than later. I have heard this a lot. Sooner rather than later is very polite. You might hear this in work. Your boss is telling you to do something, but he wants you to make it a priority. So, he wants you to do it quickly, but he doesn't want to make it seem urgent. He doesn't want to make it seem like he's putting pressure on you. So he says, please get this done. It would help if it would be sooner rather than later. But how do we get there? How do we get there? So he's asking a question. He's the only one talking, though, so who is he asking this to? This is actually a device that's called a rhetorical question, where he asks a question without expecting a response. It's more just to get you to think, and it also leads into his next topic. So let's look on. It could happen naturally as the virus makes its way through our communities. So, it could happen naturally. What could happen? What is it? It goes back to herd immunity. Herd immunity could happen naturally. Naturally, what are some other words that mean naturally? So we have, by itself, or naturally means that there is no outside interference, or factors that play a role in COVID, in the spread of COVID. Oops, let me undo that. No outside factors. Okay. So naturally means, for instance, it refers to nature. Nature is when it is left alone, it just happens naturally. Nature grows. Something else you could say happens naturally would be maybe a relationship with a significant other. At the very beginning, you might find yourself clicking with that person. You're talking, you're laughing, you're joking, and it comes easily. It comes naturally. It comes without any extra effort. So those are some synonyms, some other words for naturally. All right, naturally as the virus makes its way through our communities. All right, makes its way through. So this kind of gives an impression of being slow and methodical. It means that it is taking its time. But it is traveling throughout our communities, and we can do nothing to stop it. It is making its way through our communities. It is unimpeded, unobstructed, and it's getting from point A to point B. You could also use make its way through. You can say something that happens slowly but surely. Maybe, for instance, maybe I'm at the beach and there's a drowning swimmer about 100 feet from the shore. I'm not a great swimmer, but I know that if somebody is drowning, I hope that I would try and rescue them. I used to swim when I was younger a little bit. I'm hoping that my skills are still up to par, and so I am going to make my way through the water to them. I'm not going fast, but I'm going slow and methodically. Let's see, okay, communities. Communities also gives a certain impression. When you hear communities, think maybe a small town or a neighborhood. You can also use communities in kind of a professional context. You can say the scientific community when you want to refer to all scientists everywhere. Something that when you're talking about maybe a topic that applies to scientific related jobs, you might say the scientific community. Okay, let's keep going. But that can be dangerous because, as we've seen, many people with COVID become severely ill, and for some, it can actually be deadly. So, it can actually be, you can say by itself, it can be deadly. Actually, right here, the only reason you would add that is it adds a little bit of surprise. It's to us, it's not actually a surprise that you can die from COVID. It's completely normal. It's happening everywhere in the world right now. But if you want to add just a tiny little bit of surprise, you can say it can actually be deadly. That's good for writing as well.
Many have been wondering, do people have some immune protection after they recover? Experts tell us they think that's true, but it's not proven. And if it's true, we're not sure just how long that immunity may last.
Many have been wondering. Many have been wondering, do people have some immune protection after they recover? Immune protection here, immune is the adjective form of immunity. And immune protection refers to your body's ability to fight off sicknesses, germs, viruses, like COVID, for instance. And immune protection is what you gain once you have recovered or healed completely from whatever it is you're sick with. For instance, if you get a cold or flu, after you heal, your body learns how to fight it off, so it can't get as sick as the first time. So maybe the second time you get sick from it, it might be much less debilitating than it was the first time because you have developed an immune protection to it. Recover. This is good. It's a bit of a formal way to say heal or get better. Get better. This phrase you might hear if your coworker or friend is in the hospital. Some friends, they might get a card and write, "Oh, I hope you get better. I'm sorry to hear that you're sick." So you might hear this, get better. You would probably not hear, "I hope you recover from this sickness." That's pretty formal, and get better is much more spoken. It's much more common to hear. Let's see. All right. Experts tell us they think that's true, but it's not proven. So experts, another word related to experts is expertise. And it refers to a very high level of skill in a certain field of study. For instance, a doctor has expertise in medicine, or you could say he is a medical expert. Experts tell us they think that's true, but it's not proven. Proven. Proven is a scientific word. Generally you have to study something for a long period of time before you can prove it in a scientific way. You have to conduct scientific studies. You have to write scientific papers. Those papers have to be reviewed by other scientists before you can say something is proven. Proven essentially means there is no evidence to the contrary. And all evidence, there should be quite a bit, all evidence points to a certain fact being true. That's what proven is. Proof, you might hear in a legal context, proof or evidence means that it is something that points to guilt or innocence of a certain crime. So proof and proven is the past tense of the verb prove. So, and if it is true, we're not sure just how long that immunity may last. Just how long? We're not sure just how long. Just how long refers to the duration of time that the immunity lasts. You can also say the length of time that immunity from COVID may last after you have recovered from it.
But since herd immunity is our goal, to know if we're there, we first need to understand how fast the virus infects other people. That reproduction rate is what scientists call the R Nought of the virus. And for COVID, that number is somewhere between 2 and 3.
But since herd immunity is our goal, to know if we're there, we first need to understand how fast the virus infects other people. But since herd immunity is our goal, you might hear this in a sports context. You have in soccer or football, you have goals on either end of the field. Goal is the object that you are trying to achieve. It is also called your objective that you are aiming for. To know if we're there, we first need to understand how fast the virus infects other people. That reproduction rate is what scientists call the R Nought of the virus. And for COVID, that number is somewhere between 2 and 3. Okay, so reproduction rate. So that is the speed at which the virus reproduces itself. Reproduce is basically it copies itself and creates another virus. One infected cell will reproduce itself into 2 infected cells. And basically, the reproduction rate is how fast the virus spreads itself. And scientists call this the R Nought. I'm not a scientist, and I actually have no idea what R Nought means. But he explains it right here. For COVID, the R Nought is somewhere between 2 and 3. Let's look to the next part of the video to find out what he means by that.
So that means each person with coronavirus can infect, on average, between 2 and 3 others. The second part of the herd immunity equation depends on us.
So that means that each person with coronavirus can infect, on average, between 2 to 3 others. The second part of the herd immunity equation depends on us. So that means that each person with coronavirus can infect, pause, you have a comma here, on average. This phrase, average, you might hear this in the context of average height, average weight. Usually, average is used to describe the middle. So, if you are neither fat nor skinny, you might be average weight. Average is in the middle, and in this context, on average, that also means in general or usually. The virus can infect between 2 to 3 others. Or if you look at all infections in the entire nation or maybe the entire world, you might have a lot of variability, a lot of different infection rates, but the most common is 2 to 3, between 2 to 3 other people. The second part of the herd immunity equation depends on us. Equation is a mathematical term that can also be brought into other contexts such as science or technology, When you're talking about equation, you're talking about a problem that needs to be solved, and the equation is the solution. So the second part of the herd immunity solution depends on us.
Specifically, how many of us are already immune? In a world where no one is immune to COVID and each of us is at risk, the virus can spread like wildfire.
Specifically, how many of us are already immune? Specifically, this word means exactly or precisely, and it essentially means that, let me write this out. You want to take a deeper dive into looking at something more closely, specifically. So, I might ask my friend to go to the store for me to buy eggs, and then I might tell him specifically brown eggs. I want to specify a certain exact condition that I would like him to meet, specifically brown eggs instead of white eggs. In a world where no one is immune to COVID, and each one of us is at risk, the virus can spread like wildfire. At risk is a phrase. This goes together almost always. I am at risk when I cross the street without looking both ways. I am at risk of a car crash. I am at risk of causing a car crash. Doctors might say that some person might be at risk of diabetes or at risk of cancer. Maybe they smoke. The doctor says if they continue to smoke, they will be at risk of lung cancer. So in this case, it's a medical context, and it makes sense. We are at risk of COVID. Wildfire. I like this word. It's really two words, wild, fire, put together into one. And it means that a fire that is out of control, like a forest fire. Or, for instance, in the news nowadays, you can see that there are a lot of fires in California. They spread too quickly to stop or put out, and they are wildfires. They are out of control. All right, let's move on.
But imagine a world where there is herd immunity. Say 75% of us are already immune. That means 3/4 of the people exposed to anyone with the virus just won't get sick.
But imagine a world where there is herd immunity. Say 75% of us are already immune. Imagine a world. So he's asking you to imagine. This is almost like another rhetorical question. He's asking you to imagine something that isn't true, but he wants you to picture it in order to make you think. Imagine a world where there is herd immunity. He wants to create an example for us. Say 75% of us are already immune. So he uses these two commands, imagine and say, to cause you to imagine this imaginary world that he is talking about. That means 3/4 of the people exposed to anyone with the virus just won't get sick. 3/4, another way of writing 3/4 is this right here, 3/4. You can also say that. 3/4 or 3/4 of the people exposed to goes together. When I say that I am exposed to COVID, that means I have been around someone with COVID for enough time for them to maybe breathe around me, maybe for me to breathe in their air, and I am now exposed to the virus. So you would always say exposed to, unless you want to say that I am exposing someone to the virus. You can also add your indirect object there. I expose my brother to danger when I let him ride in the car with me without putting his seatbelt on. I expose him to danger, him being the indirect object. So you can use it as an active or passive. If you're using it in the passive, you need exposed to. And generally you can say, you use it in a medical context, you say exposed to a certain contagious disease, or in work, maybe if you work in a dangerous environment, you're exposed to risks at work. Get sick. This phrase actually goes back to another similar phrase, get better. Get sick, get better. If somebody gets sick, that means they become sick, and get is just a more informal way of saying become. Get has a lot of meanings. It means you can obtain or have something. You can pick up something. Maybe you can also say that you picked up a sickness last week. But generally, get sick. And the past tense, got sick. Just won't get sick. Or I got sick last week when I partied with greater than or equal to 10 of my friends. So, get sick and get better go hand in hand.
So even if a few of us have the virus, the rest of us who are immune stop it from spreading. That's the kind of numbers game we're talking about. But it's not a game. It's actually a formula based on that reproductive rate of the virus.
So even if a few of us have the virus. So even if. So he's using this phrase right here, so even if, to open up a conditional phrase. This phrase right here, a few of. A few just means some. Some of us. You could also say, so even if a couple of us. A couple generally refers to about two. So if there's a very small number, maybe 2 or 3, you could say a couple of us. A couple of us went to the theater last week. We wore our masks, but there were some of the people at the theater were not wearing masks. So that's how you would use it. For instance, a few of us had the virus, the rest of us. So rest in this case is not like taking a nap or sleeping or taking time off. It means remainder. It means whoever is left. The remainder of us, whoever was left over. The rest, you could say the rest of you could say who ate the rest of the cookies from the cookie jar. Maybe there were 2 cookies left out of a whole batch of 20. And maybe I ate the rest of them. I ate the last 2 cookies. And I made someone very angry who wanted those cookies. So I ate the rest of the cookies or the remainder of the cookies. Who are immune, stop it from spreading. The rest of us who are immune, stop it from spreading. That's the kind of numbers game we are talking about. Numbers game goes back to the very beginning when he mentions that this is a numbers game. This is a phrase that generally indicates that there is some kind of game or situation that is decided by math or maybe mathematical equations or problems or solutions, and it requires a mathematical approach to play this game. In this case, it's not really a game, but more of the problem of how the virus spreads and how to deal with it. This is a numbers game because it requires math and science. That's the kind of numbers game we are talking about. But it's not a game. Well, yeah, he's agreeing with me. It's actually a formula, a mathematical formula. Formula is like an equation. They are mathematical terms set up into a problem, and they are based on that reproductive rate of the virus.
Knowing that, we can figure out how many of us need to be immune for us to reach that sweet spot of herd immunity. And that critical threshold for COVID is when 1/2 to 2/3 of the US population is immune.
Knowing that, we can figure out how many of us need to be immune for us to reach that sweet spot of herd immunity. Knowing that, you can also say, with that in mind, we can figure out how many of us need to be immune. Figure out, you can also say determine. Put this right here. If you figure out a math problem, you have determined what the answer is, you have solved it. We can figure out or solve how many of us need to be immune for us to reach that sweet spot This is a good phrase, sweet spot. So this comes from baseball, actually. It's kind of a strange origin. But it means in baseball you have a bat. It's a wooden bat, and you hit a ball that is thrown at you. If you hit the ball on the sweet spot of the bat, that means it is the very most perfect spot on the bat you can hit it to get maximum force to send the ball flying. And that is called the sweet spot. It's neither sweet or really a spot, but it's just the concept taken from baseball, indicating that there is some specific area that if you target that area, then you have amazing odds of being successful. Or it might be a zone. Maybe it's you want to stay in between this zone, and that is your sweet spot, maybe. And that critical threshold for COVID is when 1/2 to 2/3 of the U.S. population is immune. So basically, this side is 1/2, and this side is 1/3. And this is the sweet spot of herd immunity, when this many people is immune, 1/2 to 2/3 of the population. This is the critical threshold. Critical. This means extremely important, vital, or essential. And threshold is basically like a level. Maybe it is, you could say, a threshold of a building. The threshold, when you cross the threshold, you are in the building. And when you exit the threshold, you are exiting the building. You are officially outside. The threshold is a very specific line. Maybe this is the line of the doorway, but you could talk about sound. If it is below your threshold of hearing, then you can't hear it. And if it is above, then you can. So, the critical threshold. This is the critical level of immunity that the U.S. population needs to have to achieve the concept of herd immunity.
That means somewhere between 150 and 216 million Americans need to be immune to meaningfully stop the virus from spreading throughout the country. But right now, most experts say we're probably a long way away from these kinds of numbers.
That means somewhere between 150 to 216 million Americans need to be immune to meaningfully stop this virus from spreading throughout the country. That means somewhere between. So somewhere between, just like we said, 1/2 to 2/3, somewhere between, you want to stay within a certain limit line. This might be your left line. This might be your right line. You want to stay somewhere in here, somewhere between here. In the road, maybe this is the right side of the road. This is the left side of your lane. You need to stay somewhere between those two in order to stay in your lane and drive safely. So, somewhere between 150 to 216 million Americans need to be immune to meaningfully stop this virus from spreading. So, meaningfully means to make a difference. If it's meaningfully, if there is a meaningful stop to the virus, that means the virus is almost entirely stopped. Stop the virus from spreading. So when you use stop and you want to stop something, maybe you want to stop your car. I want to stop my car from driving off the road. I want to stop my car from breaking down on the side of the road. Basically, if you want to stop something from doing something, you need to stop the object, then say from, and then you could use your active verb, spreading, your ing verb here, and generally that's what you would use when you'd say stop something from doing something. Stop a noun from doing an active verb throughout the country. But right now, most experts say we're probably a long way away from these kinds of numbers. A long way away. That means we are far off. Or far away. A long ways away. Or we are far from. These kinds of numbers. These kinds of numbers. This is kind of a phrase you would use in science when you're looking at data or statistics. In this case, the statistics are about how many people are immune from COVID. You're taking a statistical approach. Statistical. There we go. I got that. And you're taking more of a scientific approach, and you're dealing with a lot of data or a lot of numbers. So you might say these kinds of numbers when you're talking about the immunity rate in America.
So just like with many other infectious diseases, the showstopper will be when most people can get a vaccine, once we have one that's proven to work. And the great thing about a vaccine is that it can help build a person's immunity, but without making them sick.
So just like with many other infectious diseases, the showstopper will be when most people can get a vaccine. So just like with many other infectious diseases. So this word infectious right here is a good one. This infectious comes from infect. And similarly, it could be known as contagious. Let me spell that out for 1 second, and I already messed it up. Contagious. I-O-U-S, contagious. It means that you can pass it from one person to another very easily. Example of an infectious disease would be COVID, or a skin rash that is transferred by touch, or maybe any other highly contagious diseases, maybe some other pandemics like Ebola. And all right, so the showstopper. This is a great word. Showstopper. It's 2 words. Show, stopper, comes from stop the show. And it might be used in the case of I think the origin comes from theater, when you have a play or a show going on and something stops it. I mean, that's just kind of a breaking it down very, very simply, but basically the showstopper is when something happens that's extremely crazy or definitive. And in this case, the showstopper, which will be stopping the show of the discussion about the immunity and contagiousness of COVID. That's kind of the show that's being stopped. It will be stopped when most people can get a vaccine. Basically, showstopper, it indicates that there's something amazing going on that will bring about a great change. Once we have one thing that's proven, there's proven again to work. And the great thing about, this is a good phrase, the great thing about a vaccine is that it can help build a person's immunity, but without making them sick. And the great thing about, this is a really good one, I use this all the time. When you are describing something to your friend, maybe you saw a movie, maybe you saw Tenet by Christopher Nolan and you loved it. And you said, the great thing about Tenet by Christopher Nolan is its mind-bending cinematography. That might be the great thing about the movie. It's cinematography, how each shot is made. That might be the great thing about the movie. So that's how you might use it. You could say, the great thing about anything, really. You could say the great thing about today was I went to the grocery store. Yeah, that was amazing. I love today because the great thing about it was I went to the grocery store and I bought groceries. It's a great thing. But in this case, this great thing is a little more great. It's a vaccine that is putting a stop to a worldwide pandemic. So that's slightly more great than my grocery trip. It can help build a person's immunity. There's immunity, the noun form of immune, which is the adjective. It can help build. You can also say build up immunity, build up a person's immunity. Or you can say build a building or build a bridge. You can use build in construction a lot. or buildings, the ing form. Building is just a construct. It's a constructed structure, if you will. But in this case, you are building up, or maybe developing. You can help develop a person's immunity, but without making them sick.
Until then, we can all do our part to stop the spread of COVID through physical and social distancing, washing our hands, and staying home when sick.
But until then, we can all do our part to stop the spread of COVID. I like this phrase, do our part. When it says our part can also mean, in this case, for instance, responsibility. When we say that we can do our part, it means that we play a role in stopping the spread of COVID. Part can also mean, in a theater context, it can also mean role in a play as well. When you say the lead actor is in the play, he has the lead part, and he plays the lead part in the play. So in this case, it can mean role or responsibility. It generally means kind of like a social responsibility when you say to do your part. When you want someone to do their part, you want them to take care of their responsibilities. We can all do our part to stop the spread of COVID through physical and social distancing. Physical, this is as far as social distancing. Physical distancing is making sure that we stand a certain distance from everyone else, maybe 6 feet, for instance. But the difference between social and physical refers to the actual position of your body related to others, and social distancing, social has more of a community, meaning when you talk about social matters, you talk about matters of daily life in and around the home, for instance. And when you say social distancing, there's not a big difference between physical and social distancing, but these two words have different connotations. Physical is more about the position or location of your body, and social refers to society when they're used individually in a different context from COVID. Washing your hands and staying home when sick. Well, that's it. That's the end of the first lesson. I hope you learned something. I'll put the link to the original video in the description, as well as the vocab list from this lesson and the entire transcript from the video in case you want to review it or do some more studying. Hopefully you'll tune in again to some of my future videos. And again, I just thank you for watching.